Okay. Nanda's in. We're waiting. Okay, switch. Hari Om Tat Sat. Om Mangalam Gurudevaya Devya-matriksha Mangalam Mangalam Bhakta Vrindebhyo Sarva Lokaya Mangalam Om Stapakaya Chadharmasya Sarva Dharma Sarupine Avatar Varishtaya Ramakrishna Yate Namaha Om Sarashiva Samarambam Shankarachara Majamam Ashmarachara Prayandam Vande Gurum Param Guru Brahma Guru Vishnu Guru Deva Maheshwara Guru Reva Param Brahman Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Om Bhadrakali Namo Nityam Saraswati Namo Namaha Veda Vedanta Veda Viranga Vedanta Vijastane Vaevacha Sri Ganesha Sharada Guru Bhyo Namaha Hari Om Jai Ma Jai Ma Jai Ma. So happy to be continuing our discussions on the Devi Gita from the Srimad Devi Bhagavatam. And for those who are just joining, we're using the translation, primarily we're using the translation by C. Mackenzie Brown. This version has some commentary and comments, so it's a useful study resource. And so let's see, where are we? We last Wednesday, we discussed verse 9 of the first chapter. So we're not going that fast through the text, which is actually pretty good because this is we get to do an in-depth meditation and study of these verses. And so what happened up to this point is a really quick recap. What's being discussed is an ancient tale where the Divine Mother appeared as an infinite pillar of light. And so we're going to get to that pillar of light, hopefully in a few meetings. The backstory of why the Divine Mother appeared as this pillar of light, and that's actually the main content of the Devi Gita. The pillar of light will take on the gods do austerity. They have a vision or experience, a major peak experience of seeing the divine as this infinite light. That light takes on the form of a goddess and converses with them. And the reason they were doing the austerity is to get Adya Shakti, the primordial power, to be reborn as Parvati, in order to satisfy a crying need. So the backstory we're telling right now is a little bit of that crying need. I'm going to do a share screen so we can look at some of these verses that we've talked about so far. Since there's only a few verses, I'm going to read the core verses that we're talking here. Hear, O king. So Vyasa, I'm going to start from verse 4. Vyasa says, Hear, O king, this ancient tale, when the body of Sati was consumed in flames, the bewildered Shiva wandered about, falling here and there, motionless on the ground. This is a story about the story, the nature of the Purana, the story within the story. So before we get to the present story, we have to tell the previous story of how Sati, the Divine Mother, in her incarnation as the daughter of Dakshani, also known as Sati, how due to Daksha's insult to Lord Shiva, she gave up her body and disappeared. Her physical presence was removed from this world. Shiva then picks up her body and goes in great grief. And here he wanders about the three worlds and falling here and there motionless on the ground. This is the scene. Verse 5, he was unaware of the manifest world, his mind fully absorbed. Regaining his self-composure, he passed his time contemplating the true nature, the true form of the goddess. So some versions, as we mentioned, and in our other class that our other class that we're giving at the seminary is our Hindu goddess class. We talked about pilgrimage and the Shakti Pitams. So these two, it's interesting that just right now, the two stories just cross each other perfectly. Much we're talking how worlds meet. This is an example of two worlds passing, or two stories. They'll diverge shortly, right? They won't stay like this. Somebody has their sound on. If you could mute yourself, I'm hearing something. Just make sure. So in the larger story that many Hindus know about the Shakti Pitams, when Shiva is in great lamentation carrying the corpse of Devi, of Sati, the gods, realizing that in his mad dance of destruction and in sorrow, he's going to destroy the world, or in more of this scene here, he's so absorbed in meditation, they need to wake him. In a certain sense, he's not doing his duty as Mahadev, as Shiva. So they need to, they begin to cut up the body of Sati. Normally Vishnu is usually seen with his arrow or his disc, cuts up the body. The body falls, becomes stones, and falls in 51 or 108 places. And these are known as the Shakti Pitams. And that's our discussion in our previous class about pilgrimage places. These are the main pilgrimage places in India. Most of them are in India, where the body of Sati fell. So that's the scene. We mentioned Tom also. Then we mentioned last Wednesday, and in our class also, that a lot of discussion was why Sati gave up her body, and we primarily been basing our discussion. I'll come out of this real quick. The main version of the story from the Srimad Bhagavatam and from the Devi Bhagavatam, where the main story where Sati and Shiva, Sati hears that Daksha is doing a big sacrifice. She wants to go. Shiva doesn't want her to go, but allows her to go. That's the general story. She goes, gets offended. Daksha commits this great offense, and then she burns her body, jumps in the fire, and lights her own body, and disappears. Leaves the physical world. That's the main story. We mentioned briefly in our last in Sunday's class. There's other versions of the story that are even more tantric, more Shakti-like. One is from the Kalika Purana, and there actually Sati never actually goes to Daksha's sacrifice. He just hears that Daksha that didn't invite them, and she gives up her body right there. And then Shiva doesn't recognize that she's given up her body. Later she finds out, oh, Sati has given up her body, and it's because of Daksha, and then she goes and destroys Daksha's sacrifice. And in a less known text that I'm very interested in, and who knows, maybe in the far future we can discuss, there's a Devi Gita in that text too, called the Bhagavati Gita, where Parvati speaking to Himalaya, I believe. But anyway, that text is called the Mahabhagavat Upapurana. It's a further development of Shaktism, and there Sati doesn't commit suicide. She doesn't. In order to punish Daksha, she creates another form of herself called Chaya Sati, a shadow Sati, and tells that Sati, "You commit suicide, you die, right? Burn yourself up." Right, and I'll just disappear. So actually, Sati never dies, and that's a big theme. Is that a big theme in Shaktism? Is the way this story has been told and been used? Is that Sati means not just truth; it means a true wife, a good wife, a chaste wife, and a chaste wife lives only for the husband. And when the husband is insulted, she commits suicide. This is the idea, and that's been converted into the Sati practice. Where women would jump into the funeral pyres of their husband, follow them through death, as if their life had no meaning independent of their husband. That's how this text has been used in many ways. But these other versions in the Kalika Purana and the Mahabhagavat Upapurana, that's not how it happens at all. In the Mahabhagavat Upapurana, she doesn't. She's punishing Daksha, right? But she cannot disappear. She's not doing it. She does not commit suicide at all. Actually, she never dies because she's a Ajashakti. How to say it? I'm trying to think how to say it. She's not being a dutiful wife. She's being Parashakti. She's being the supreme goddess itself, right? And when people do not recognize her, she disappears. Her punishment is to disappear. And when she disappears, literally all hell breaks loose. All hell breaks loose. Shiva gets very upset. Shiva kills Daksha, and the whole thing happens. In a similar trend, in a similar move here in the Devi Gita, we'll go back to the verses. I'll show you here. Right, when she disappears, literally again, all hell breaks loose. And this is what we read last week. We'll go through these verses really quick. Meanwhile, in the three-tiered universe, all that was mobile and immobile lost its auspicious charm. It's sabhagya, right? We talked about that term last Wednesday. When the entire world is oceans, continents, and mountains, but was bereft of energy or of shakti, right? Joy shriveled in the hearts of each and every being. All people were despondent, their careworn spirits exhausted. Then, ever drowned in the sea of misery, they were consumed by disease. The planets retrograded ominously, and fortunes of the gods declined. Kings too, this is the verse we ended, suffered misfortune due to the material and spiritual forces set in motion by the death of Sati. Now at this time arose the great demon Tadaka by name. So this is where we left off last Wednesday. In such a state, when we lose our connection to Divine Mother, right? And this is a story about, an ancient story about how Daksha offended the Divine Mother and she withdrew her energy, right? We can also think, and I think we're meant to think, and there's texts within the Devi Bhagavatam itself telling us to think this way, that this story is also about us, right? And so there may be a part of us that ignores Shakti, that ignores Shiva or ignores Shakti, and causes Shakti to withdraw, right? There's a verse that we'll probably get to next week, in a few verses forward, where Vishnu says, actually, all of our suffering is not caused directly by Devi. She's ever loving. She only does good, right? But sometimes we need correction, right? And so our suffering is only meant to correct us. So the suffering of the world, in this, the way this is presented, it could be the world. It's an ancient story about the world, but it's also a story, a present day story about our world, not just the world we live in, but our psychophysical, emotional world, our personal world, our microcosmic world, right? When sabhagya, when Shakti, when we lose connection with the Divine Mother, with our mother, with the divine Shakti, things go bad. And in that dark environment, right, where joy shrivels in our heart, and we are despondent and lack of interest and passion for life, as we discussed last up with this term, or the term udasana, that one word that was used in the previous verse, that when that happens, demons can come up. And demons could be external, literally external demons from the underworld, from the hellish realms, could be titans and tyrants in this world. But also, and we do not deny that happens, and it may be happening, but we have our own demons, right? And in the Chandi, we've talked about all the different, like Mahishasura, Raktabija, Chanda and Munda, Shumba and Nishumba. Each one of these demons has been interpreted by the tradition itself, as well as our own presentation, as representing both ancient stories and our own personal psychology, our own our own ego and sense of lack, and our desires and our uncontrolled thoughts. You know, each of these demons could represent this. So Tadaka is a general demon that comes up by name Tadaka. So we'll go on. Now we'll start with verse 10. This is the picture of Tadaka. In case you want to know what he looks like, this is what he looks like, right? Yeah. And
under all these.
Somebody has their, please mute, thank you. So this picture has him doing meditation. So this is interesting. He's a demon sitting very nicely in good posture, in better posture than I have, in Padmasana, with a proper mudra, eyes closed, probably chanting some mantra, doing some austerity, right? But he's a demon. Right, and I remember one yogi named Shankaracharya, a tantric yogi, well-wisher of ours. He told us many years ago, he says, "Don't be a yogi demon." Like, excuse me? Says, yeah, the demons do the same practices we do. right? Look, they do asana, they do yajna, they do japa, they do pranayama, they fast, they do different types of austerities, right? Right. But they do so with selfish intention, right? Without the highest spiritual, with selfish intention for their own personal benefit, right? And with full, what we'll see in these verses, with full body consciousness, right? For material benefit only. So he says, don't be a yogi demon. We're doing the same sadhana they're doing. They're doing the same sadhana we do. The only difference is intention, right? And that's a different way. We don't really think of religious practice this way. But in tapasya and austerity, in these type of practices, right, it's the practice itself is designed to give concentration and designed to create tapas, to heat that has an effect. And the way we really say is that the heat created by austerity, right, it has a power. We can use that power or direct that power for concentration, for higher thinking, higher thinking. But also, as the story is, the gods get scared of yogis getting too much power, right? And symbolically, that like Indra gets scared or Brahma gets scared that, oh, such a yogi is doing so much austerity, he's going to get so much power, he may threaten my position, right? Indra often thinks that, and he goes and creates some temptation to stop the yogi, demonic or divine, from performing his austerities and getting too much power. It was the idea that he may take over heaven, right? Very interesting. So this is what Taraka is doing. He's born in a demonic family, as from the old stories, and he wants to become king of the world, right? King of the three worlds, right? The three-layered, three-tiered universe, as last week's verse. Brahma-datta-varo daityo'bhavat-trailokya-nāyakaḥ. So brahma-datta-varo, right? So the daito, let me get my verses here. Brahma-datta. I can see them better here. Daityo'bhavat-trailokya-nāyakaḥ. That demon became the lord of Trailokya, of the three worlds, the hellish realms, the earthly realms, and the heavenly realms, the realm of the gods. He became the lord of all three realms, right? We have kings and presidents and prime ministers and like that of this realm. He became that. We have the demons have their lord. He became that. And even Indra lost his throne, and all the gods had to be eventually ran from heaven, as he became the lord of heaven, right? He invaded heaven even. How did he do so? By brahma-datta-varo. Brahma-datta-varaha means the Brahma, translated as Brahma given boon. That's how we wrote it. Brahma-datta means to give. Varo, the boon given by Brahma. That's what this picture shows. Brahma appears to Mahisha. And what austerity he was doing is described in some, I think in Mahabharata and some other texts, describes some of his austerities. First, he sat properly or stood. Sometimes versions like Hiranyakashipu was standing on one foot or standing on tiptoes or seated like that, and began to control his breath and began to control his food. Pretty soon he was eating only one meal a day. Then he was eating only leaves that fell, dry leaves that fell from a tree. That's one type of austerity. Then he drank only water. Then he ate only air, right? So incredible types of fasting. But then he was also described as doing sacrifice. What was the sacrifice? We take ghee and sesame seeds and grains and incense, and we say a mantra, holy mantra, and go swaha, we pour it into the fire, and then it goes to the heavens. But he was so intense and so focused on his sacrifice, on his goal to get a boon from Brahma, that he'd cut off a finger, dip it in ghee, swaha. Then he cut off another finger, swaha. Then he cut off a hand, swaha. Cut off a leg, swaha. And that's a scene we see, especially in the Devi Bhagavatam. Lots of demons do this type of austerity, showing incredible focus, but also they offer what's dear to them, which is their body, right? And we'll see that's a theme with demons in general and Taraka especially. So Brahma-datta-varo daityo'bhavat-trailokya-nāyakaḥ. That fiend or that asura, that demon became Lord of the Lord of the three worlds by that Brahma given boon. And then this word, what was his boon? So in the story, what he appears, Brahma appears and says, okay, I'm pleased with your austerity, ask a boon. And they always ask the same demon. You'll see it becomes almost comedic at a certain point. They always ask the same boon. Let me be immortal, that I'll never die. That's always the boon. I want to never die. Because if you never die, of course, it shows that they're so attached to the body and life and their understanding of life that's their reality. They want to live forever. Right. But also it means if they can never die, that means nobody can kill them. If nobody can kill them, they become invincible in war. And therefore, with that boon, he could easily become lord of the hellish realms. The other demons can die, and he can't. Right. And then he can easily become lord of the human realm. And then even the gods, if Indra and Varuna and Vayu can't kill him, right? And they can be killed. Right, they lose their position and he becomes lord of everything. Right. So what is the boon? So he says, make me immortal. I'm giving some more details from other texts. So here it only describes the whole story of Tadaka is told in 1.5 verses in this text. It's just a quick jump to the bigger story. So I can just flesh it out a little bit. He says, make me immortal. And then because Brahma is famous, because Brahma himself was born, right, as per the stories, and Brahma himself will die. So usually his answer is, I cannot give you what I myself don't have. I myself will die. So how can I give you a boon that you won't die? Right? It's impossible. You're asking something that's not possible. Right? So that's a big statement. Right? You're asking something that's not possible. If you want to compare one verse in Bhagavad Gita in chapter 2, verse 27, I'll just say in English, death is certain for one who has been born, and rebirth is inevitable for one who has died, right? Therefore, you should not lament over the inevitable, Krishna says, right? And the second chapter is where Krishna is speaking about the immortality of the soul, right, to Arjuna. So the fact is anything that's been born will die. But then there's another thing. The next line, it says anything that dies will be born, right? And therefore he tells Arjuna, you shouldn't be upset, because he's trying to convince Arjuna not to be bewildered and upset by the death and destruction that he's seen or about to see in the war, right? Because everything dies, and everything that dies will not stay dead. It will be reborn again. But there's another point also in these verses in the Bhagavad Gita, that there's something immortal that doesn't die and therefore doesn't get reborn. So the soul, actually the self, the Atman, really doesn't take birth and doesn't die. Bodies come and go. Bodies take birth, bodies die. But the soul is immortal and unchanging, right? Primordial. Right? There's so many verses described like that in the Gita, right? And sometimes we think, oh, the soul has been reborn. Just nothing has happened to the soul. A new body has been superimposed and identified, or the soul has been identified with another body. But the bodies come and go. The soul actually is eternal and unchanging, which is different than it's a different type of, the soul is eternal. It's not long lasting. And so when a demon asks, let me not die, really they're saying they want to live forever. That's different than recognizing their immortal nature, recognizing them. So maybe we should say, perhaps not being a yogi demon, maybe we do our austerities, and when we have our beloved Lord come in front of us and says, I'm pleased with your loving devotion and your worship, oh Swami Bhajanananda, oh Swami Ambikananda, oh Carolyn, oh whoever the devotee is, ask a boon. Maybe we should ask, not for physical immortality, right? Like Tarakasura or like Hiranyakashipu, or like all the other demons in the stories, right? Maybe we should ask, may I know that which doesn't die, right? May I know myself as eternal, right? Or may I know the eternal one, rather than try to live forever in the physical body, which Brahma says is impossible. Even he He cannot give it because he doesn't have it, but it's not a thing to give. The nature of the body is not to last forever. There's a verse Swami Chaitanya quotes from the Sankhya tradition that describes anything that's been put together, anything that's made of parts and put together. In case you're wondering, the body is made of parts and put together, elements put together, will eventually fall apart. It's its nature. It's a planned obsolescence, as we call now, It won't last. So he says that it's not possible, right? So then, but Taraka says to Brahma, says, "You're my father. You're the father of all beings. You've offered me a boon. This is the boon I want." But this is not, Brahma says this is not possible. But this is the boon I want, right? So Brahma says, okay, think carefully, right? Ask a boon, be very careful of the boon you ask, right? So that you satisfy your desire to live forever, right? Ask a way that I can give you that blessing. Figure out a way, use your intelligence, right? And so he thinks, the boon I want is that, see, Shiva, he knows the story. I mean, he came up because Sati is no longer in the world, and Shiva is an anxiety, and now he's closed his eyes and forgot the world, right? So Shiva has no wife, they have no children, right? So he says, I want to be, may nobody be able to kill me, right? May death only come to me by the son of Shiva, right? And the term here actually is, let me see, I can find the term, I can see it, śivaurasastu. It's like the legitimate son. And this is a language that I was thinking about this, we were looking at the old translations, we probably wouldn't use this language anymore, but means a son of somebody that's not married. So Shiva has enough power to create a son. He can create the sun, even. He can create universes by his mere will. So he could theoretically just make a son. And but the Shiva, his legitimate son, means a son from his wife, from his married wife, right? A son born in marriage, right? And actually, the actual boon is that the 7-day-old son of Shiva, the legitimate son of Shiva, will be the one who kills me, right? Hantā, what's the term here? Śivaurasa, legitimate. Shiva's own legitimate. Sutā, son. Bhavaja. So, sorry. This verse, it's the line 2 spills into the first half spills into the second half. With this boon, he roared, Taraka, I have this boon. Now no one can kill me. Shiva has no son. What to speak of no son? A 7-day-old son? The 7-day-old son can't kill me. Shiva has no son. Shiva has no wife, so he can't get a son, right? So he thinks he's in pretty good condition. And this is and actually so many of the stories, they become a little comedic, like in the Chandi, Mahishasura gets a boon that no woman will kill him, right? That he's thinking, oh, no God, no demon, no animal, no weapon. He describes all these things that can't kill him. No lightning bolt, no rock will fall on his head, right? But he didn't even think, that's the setup for the Chandi, he didn't even think that a woman could kill him, a female, a Shakti could kill him, right? So that's of course, the humor in that story is that she's a Mahashakti. I remember in the what is it, the Lord of the Rings, when Sauron, it's like when I forget Amikananda would know the characters when she
Eowyn.
What is it? Tell me something.
Eowyn, where the head of the Nazgul, the 9 black riders, said, don't you know it is written that no man may kill me? And she takes off her helmet, but I am no man.
Yeah.
And here comes down, she plunges the sword.
Yeah, when that happened, we called it all Kali Mandir devotees went to go see that movie. And we're like, Jai Ma Kali! It was right out of the Chandi. Like, it's a great scene. Like, you even think, but also shows the incredible crass foolishness that to think that a woman could never kill me. So he thinks he's being very clever, right? Oh, Shiva has no wife, therefore can have no child, and only a 7-day-old child of Shiva can kill me, therefore I'm safe, right? Therefore I'm immortal. That's what you're thinking. I can't be killed, right? If that thing is like I have to be killed like by the son of a barren woman or something like that. It's a thing. It's not a thing, right? It's not a possible being. The being who can kill me does not exist. That's another way of saying it, right? In the story of Hiranyakashipu and Nishingadev, that's even a greater example of this. Hiranyakashipu asks a boon. Oh, he does tapasya. Lord Brahma appears to him. What do you want? I want to be immortal. I can't. Even I die. I can't make you immortal. Anything that's born, the same story. Everything that's born that must die. Everything that dies must be reborn. Right. So he said, okay, may I? And then he thinks he covers all the bases. May I not be born? May I not be killed by man or animal, or by in daytime or nighttime, on the ground or in the air, by hand or by weapon, inside or outside, the daytime or nighttime. He describes every possible thing that he thinks he's covered. And I think about this a lot, because every year, and coming up next couple months, we have Nishingadev Jayanti coming up. So we think about the story a lot, and we love Nishingadev, and that story is one of our favorites. And I sometimes think it was like I get in I get in the car. We have a very good car with really good bumpers and really good safety features and airbag, and I put my seatbelt on, right, real careful. And then I drive really carefully, don't speed. Then I come home and I eat organic food, and I without any pesticides. And then I try to walk. It's like I'm trying to okay, I'm not going to be killed by a car accident, by heart disease, by I protect myself by COVID, by it's like we protect ourselves, all the things that we won't die by this. But eventually something is gonna cause our death, right? It's impossible, no matter how much we try and how careful we are, our death is still certain, right? So this is the scene. So he thinks his death, he's safe. Right, and with that seeming immortality, he attacks the world. So this is the big. I'm spending a little time on this because I think it will move on very quickly, and I think the story is told just in a verse and a half, but as a setup for a lot of the teaching that will happen in the first and second chapter of the Devi Gita, as Devi begins to speak, especially about the nature of the self and Brahman, and herself as Brahman, and to realize the one being. It's a very non-dualistic Vedantic style text, right? And there is a difference between the body and the soul, and that's an important. And the demons think that the body is the soul; they are the body. And of course, demon. We have to be careful when we use the word demon. These are ancient stories of underworld fiends, right, of anti-gods called asuras, and even worse characters called rakshasas, and like this, right? He's an asura. And we have to be careful what we attribute demonhood to, who and what we demonize, right? So we should be really careful and take this a little bit symbolically and not try to describe things as demonic. I think that's a dangerous endeavor. Take it personally and try to overcome our inner shortcomings. Perhaps that's, I think, is a safer thing. But in the story, to take the demons asking these boons, one of the qualities of the demon or the demoniac, asuric, right, asuric gunas, is taking the body to be the self, right? And the term for that is deha vasana. Is a term used in the Vedantic scripture that means thought, vasana, the thought or identification with the body. And a lot of us are inspired by tantra and yoga because it has what we call a body positive perspective, because it sees tantra to hold that the body itself is divine. It's a manifestation of Shakti. It's a manifestation. The world, the Prakriti is a manifestation of Adi Shakti, right? Or at least a manifestation of Purusha, connected like that, rather than just completely false or disconnected. It's a real thing, but it's still a temporary thing, right? The body is real. The body is incredibly valuable because only in the human body can we attain self-realization. So the sages tell us. It says in the scripture that the devas long for a human body. The devas are, Carolyn gave me a little book on the yogini temples today at the mechanic. I was reading it. I was waiting for my car to be smog. And the term says that the devas are jealous of us, right? They're jealous of the human body, right? Because of what we can experience. We can go through karmas. We can experience things. We can work things out. We have freedom in a certain sense. But it doesn't mean that we are the body, right? That we have a body, right? And if we think we're the body, then we're attributing some eternality and supremacy to something that's dependent and changing and not eternal. So it's an important point that the demons and these stories, not like, oh, everybody who's body conscious is a demon, we shouldn't do like that, but the demons can represent extreme body consciousness, and then along with that becomes extreme, another quality of demon, and therefore don't be a yogi demon, is extreme self-centeredness and self-absorption. So the austerity he's doing is not really to worship Brahma out of love. He's doing the austerity to get a boon, that he becomes powerful, that he becomes leader, that everyone will worship him, everyone will love him, right? This is the self-centeredness, right? Very many years ago at the yoga center in Costa Mesa, where I got kind of my spiritual start, the sadhu who founded that center is a devotee of Sri Ramakrishna, Ramakrishna, and there was a small discussion group after one of his lectures. I was 16, 17 years old, so this is early on. This is a powerful moment of my own understanding, and he was talking about the difference between. He was using a kind of a little bit metaphysical, Western metaphysical term of like psychic experience, right? Not necessarily like psychic as in like mind reading or something like that, but a psychic experience that happens within the higher psychic regions, the mental regions, and comparing that to a spiritual experience. And so he was using that language, and yeah, my first thing I was able to ask, didn't have much guts back then. I was an unknown boy, but he says, well, how do you know the difference between a psychic experience and a spiritual experience, to use that language, right? And he says, well, one makes you humble, one makes you egotistical. That's a simple answer. And you have a powerful yogic experience, perhaps, right? But the effect of which is to make you very proud and look what I can do, look what I can do, look who I am. Don't you realize? Look at how much power I have, like this, or what I've experienced, or what I realize, right? That's not the symptom of a devotional, real spiritual experience, divine experience, right? So the demons, they do tremendous austerities, they chant mantras, they do tapasya, mostly the same tapasya we do, right? With an intention for the body and for themselves in the center. So we have to understand at a certain point that we're not the center. I mean, in one sense, we're the self is the center, and we're the self, right? But but the divine is the focus of our attention, right? And not only our body is not us and temporary, even our mind is not us and temporary. Even our ego is not us and temporary. We have an ego, we're not the ego. We have a mind, not the mind. We have a personality. We can see some very simple practices in Vedanta. The difference between cause and effect. One's the cause of the other. Difference between observer and observed. Between subtle and gross. Between all these ways of understanding. And we should be searching for in our spiritual life the unchanging, the eternal, the real, the original, the cause, the subtle, like this, and so the body, the ego, like that, is not the ultimate goal. But that's not meant to dismiss and minimize the importance of the body, whereas like unreal or sinful, something like that. You can do a hyper Advaitic thing of the world. The body in the world doesn't exist. It has no ultimate reality. That's a way. Maybe that's a realization. Maybe that has some value, but it's not very appealing, I don't think. Or other religions hold the body is intrinsically fallen and corrupted, right, and sinful, and the cause of sinfulness. I don't think that's healthy either. And tantric and Shakta view does not hold that view. The body is infinitely valuable, right? But not us, right? It's not the source of everything. And it's not eternal. That's the thing. He thinks it's eternal. That fiend became master of the three-tiered universe after procuring the boon from Brahma, this boon. Another question is, why did Brahma give him such a boon? Brahma, he's the Lord, he's the creator of the world, the secondary creator, right? The demiurge, I guess we call it, right? Why did he? Brahma is one of his functions in the Puranas is to give boons to demons, right? Because he's the father of everyone. He's the father of the Prajapatis, right? Including Daksha, right? The progenitors of. He's the father of the Manus. He's the father of one of the Prajapatis is Kashyapa. Kashyapa is the father of the gods and of the demons. So Brahma is the grandfather of every, at least in the level of people we're talking about in this mythic story. He's the grandfather of Taraka, and he is the grandfather of Indra, the Lord of Heaven, right? So he's equally disposed towards everybody. Right. And there's verses and we see in the stories, his boons seem like, oh no, he's given this powerful boon. He's given a boon to a monster, and the monster is going to cause suffering. But within the boon will be the humbling of the monster, right? Because within this, we know how the story ends. Shiva's going to have a wife. The Mahashakti Adidevi Bhagavati will take birth as Parvati. They'll have a child, and when the child's 7 years old, will kill Taraka, right? So his boon, within the boon, he thinks, oh, I'm safe, right? But within the boon, he just described how he's going to die, right? So actually the boon is also a curse. The boon is, may you be killed, not like nobody but the 7-day child of, the legitimate child of Shiva will kill you. He's saying the 7-day legitimate child of Shiva will be born to kill you, because everyone dies, including you. Your end will come like that. So Brahma has a very interesting character. He gives boons liberally, even to demons, right? But that's also, he's doing the divine plan, right? He has a higher understanding. So what happened? Iti kalpita-mṛtyuḥ sa deva-devair-mahāsuraḥ śivaurasa-sutā-bhāvāj-jagarja na-nanda. Iti kalpita-mṛtyuḥ. Thus, with his death fixed by Brahma. You think about this language. I mean, I didn't look ahead to this verse. I just gave interpretation of the previous verse. The boon of Brahma in the previous verse fixed his death, right? It wasn't a blessing of immortality. It was a blessing of being killed by, actually it's a blessing because actually he's killed by a divine being, and therefore will attain his own type of liberation, right? And that's another thing, actually, when, see, a demon, this is an interesting point given in the Chandi also. A demon, they've done so bad, lifetimes of selfish, cruel behavior. The karma for that is long suffering. Of course, they live in hell. So the long suffering means if long suffering in hell is the punishment of hellish behavior, that means you continue to live in that realm, right? What's the potential? What's the path to liberation for such a being? It's simply a monster simply doing monstrous deeds forever by his own nature, by his own karma, by his own habit, right? Brahma, being his loving father, thinks, oh, he's done a little bit of austerity, right? Most bad people don't even think about doing any austerity. I mean, he's a yogi, and okay, he has there's a pedigree of divine family like that we can't go into, right? So Brahma thought he arranged with one boon not only the birth of Ajadevi, the Divine Mother, as Parvati, and the birth of the great general Skanda, Kartikeya, right? But he's also guaranteed the liberation of Tarakasura. Rather than long suffering in hell, which he deserves, as the texts say, right? He attains heaven. So in the Chandi, after the killing of Mahishasura, the gods in the Shakrati Stuti pray in the voice of Devi. He says, the demons have committed such crimes that they deserve long suffering in hell. Let them all attain heaven by being killed by my weapons, touched by my divine hands, right? So that's and then so Devi thinks, how should I liberate them? They deserve to go to hell, but I'm their mother, I shall liberate them. Brahma thinks that he deserves to be in hell, but I'm his grandfather, I shall liberate him, right? So I think that's also important. So here, with his death thus fixed, iti kalpita-mṛtyuḥ sa deva-devair-mahāsuraḥ. Deva-devaha, been fixed by the gods, here it means by Brahma, right? The great demon, what did he do? Realizing, right, he thought that Shiva has no son, right? Shiva's not married. Shiva has no son, right? No lawful son of Shiva exists, right? And Shiva won't even open his eyes, right? You know, so there's no chance of there's no plan for Devi to be born, and if she's born, Shiva's not interested in marrying anybody again, right? The last time it happened, he caused him suffering, and that's he's in Amarnath cave with his eyes closed, meditating, forgetting her, trying to forget her, meditating on her real nature and forgetting her manifested nature, right? So he thinks he's pretty tough. So he, what's the term? Bhaviṣyati. He, with great excitement and joy and emotion, roared, right? Like, I'm with this blessing, I can be Lord of the world, right? He roared and attacked, right? Then the next verse 12. Actually, before we move on, what time is it? We have a few minutes. I have a few things in my notes I forgot to mention. So a little bit about this body conscious, because that's what he's getting. He got a boon to live a long time, right? But the boon is that he will die. He will die in a divine way, right? A unique way, but he will still die, right? So he's not conscious. He thinks, oh, I'm safe, not realizing that his death is certain, right? And there's a great line, Swami Vivekananda, when he'd write, letters from Vivekananda are very inspirational and very emotional and informative, right? And he was in the habit very often, after signing his name, right, to come with your loving son, to one of the devotees in America, you know, Vivekananda, or however he signed his name at the time, then he'd often put a verse. And I was looking this morning, I ran out of time, I was looking for the verse, trying to find the letter where it's from, but he's quoting from some Puranic verse or some Shastric verse, right? And it says, if you want to succeed in business, right, in the things of the world, you should think that you will never die, right? But if you want to realize God, you should think that claws of death are already in your hair. That means he's already grabbing the Lord of Death. Already he's grabbing you by the hair, already touching you, right? So what an interesting verse, right? That if you want to be successful in the material world, think you'll, because you need that. It's like, oh, I can do it. I can be successful with this. Let's do this, right? I did all this work, right? I get this boon. Let's do this, right? I'm immortal. I can, like that. This is the opposite of, we should also, I want all you to feel that you have a lot to live for, and you can satisfy your dreams. I want your noble desires and dreams to become true. You be happy and successful and prosperous and healthy and satisfied in your work and life, right? But it's going to end. With all that, it's still going to end. You know, I'm sorry to tell you. I mean, this is Swami's always our downers. They always point this out. it's our nature to be overly obsessed with the temporary nature and the ultimately unsatisfying nature of things, right? If you want to realize God, you should, in the middle of all this, you should know that death is certain, and death could come at any moment. The hands of death are already in our hair. Very powerful, I think, very powerful image. I think about this a lot. Swami Shivananda, he says there's 4 things you should remember every day without fail. Right. Let me see if it's pretty bad if the 4 things that he says to remember, if I don't remember them. We'll see. You can all return your tuition will be returned to you if you so desire, if I don't get this right. He says, first things, remember death. First one, remember death. Right? That death is certain. Comes to all beings, it will come to us too. Second is remember the suffering, pain and suffering. Right? Because we forget sometimes that also life is, I mean, this is Buddhism 101. Right? If we don't realize, I mean, we shouldn't be, I don't think Buddhism may be too obsessed with suffering, but we should still know that, remember that suffering comes from attachment and the causes of suffering, the temporary nature of the objects of our desire, the whole thing, suffering. What are the causes of suffering? So remember death, remember suffering, says remember the lives of saints and sages. So they're examples of people who attain something, right? They're our heroes, our examples, our guides, right? And then the 4th is to remember God, right? These are the 4 things to remember. Remember God, remember the lives of saints, remember death, remember that suffering is part of life. Right, disease and suffering like this, right? And not to be a downer, but I think it's important because it lights a fire to our life, to our spiritual life, right? Sri Ramakrishna said that the attainment of God, the realization of God, the realization of the self is the goal, is a purpose of human life. And while we have many purposes, I'm not denying, and he wasn't denying the various purposes we have, the karmas we're born with, the karmas we develop, and desires we develop. We have the right part of the human body also is to fulfill those desires, and the 4 putraḥ, the 4 goals of life, of success and happiness and wealth and enjoyment and dharma like that. But the final goal is that of moksha, should not be forgotten. It says in the Srimad Bhagavatam, when Prahlad went to demon school, right? I also went to demon school, right? They learned, he says, the 3 goals of life, right? It means dharma, artha, and kama, right? Enjoy, living by some moral sense of society, dharma, artha for wealth, and kama for pleasure, right? He forgot, the only thing left out is moksha, liberation. Not having moksha or God as a goal, everything else is the same. The like final goal has to be. So again, don't be yogi demon. Don't forget moksha ultimately, and remembering death. I think Sri Ramakrishna would, we all know the stories of Sri Ramakrishna. He, at the end of the day, as the sun went down during his sadhana period, he'd be on the roof of the kuti, the room where he was staying, watching the sun. He'd be crying, "Mother, another day has passed, and I haven't seen you." Right? It's like he was longing. He's like, my life is passing day by day. Our life passes, and we don't see you. Right? So this is a divine quality. Right? Interesting. At the end, after he had saw her, and he couldn't stop seeing her, at the end of his life, he would also go on the roof and cry, "Mother, where am I? Where the devotees haven't come. Another day has passed, and the disciples haven't come. The lovers of God that I want to share my love for you and what I've learned from you with some pure souls, but they haven't come." And he'd call for them. Interesting. That longing was still there, first for God and then for the devotees. So I think that's important. So with his death was fixed by Brahma, the great demon, realizing no lawful son of Shiva existed, roared and rejoiced. Let's see, verse 12. Tena chupa drutaha sarve swastana pratyuchitaha suraha śivaurasa-sutā-bhāvāj-jagarja chintama I want to touch my screen and make it bigger. It doesn't work that way. My screen is on my pad. My eyes, let me look up. Maybe I can do that on the screen. Hold on. My eyes aren't good. Verse 12. Duratyayam. Tena cha upadrutaha. Then he was, they were all the gods. It says Sadava. Suraha is the word Suraha at the end means the god, the shining ones. Asura are the demons, right? The ones who are the opposite, the anti-shining. Sura means shining here. Just like Deva is also means shining, right? So Sura and Deva are equivalent words for the same thing. And Asura is the opposite. So they're the opposite qualities of these divine shining qualities, right? They all of them were, he attacked all the gods, and they were driven from their homes. It says swastanat, from sarve sastanat, from their own places, right? So in the story, they had to vacate heaven, right? And we see in the real world right now, in the material world, some great powerful army is attacking, and other people are fleeing. They're leaving their homes. They don't know, are their homes still there? Are their neighbors okay? They're in a foreign, you can see very heartbreaking what's unfolding in present day history. But this is, the gods themselves have experienced this, right? When a great despot took over heaven. They're driven from this swastanat, from their own place. So I think if we take this a little bit symbolically, also what it means as a spiritual aspirant, when this happens to us, when our material consciousness, perhaps represented by Taraka, takes control, we lose our position. Our divines, our higher voices, our higher aspects lose their place, and we become homeless also, right? And what's the symptom of it? śivaurasa-sutā-bhāvāj, chintamaha. They're suffering from persistent anxiety, right? Being driven from their home, losing their place, losing their position, right? They suffered from continuous state of anxiety. Chinta means worry, right? Why? Because there is no legitimate son of Shiva. Śivaurasa-sutā, right? This legitimate son of Shiva doesn't exist. And their situation is horrible. The only way to fix it is the son of Shiva, and that doesn't exist. And sometimes we look and we see that there doesn't seem to be any way out. Right? What time is it? 8:03. Let's see if we can get this last verse maybe. The gods thought. This is now put in the words. It doesn't say devu vacha, but that's why it's in parentheses here. What the gods thought. Nangana shankarasyasti katam tat sutra sambhavaha ashmakam bhagyahinam hinanam kattam karyam bhaviṣyati. So here they thought, Shiva has no wife. How shall he get a son? This is the question, right? The term here is actually, uses the word Shankara. The word is the name. This is the first time we're seeing this name in the text. Shankara, beautiful name for Shiva. And it says he has no angana. Angana is a very specialized word for wife or woman, right? Could be, we're thinking, two ways of thinking of angana. It's kind of like one's like better half, right? One's limb, or one of beautiful limbs, one who's limb, so it's a description of a woman, but a woman when it's attached to, connected to. So here it means, and also in the dictionary, you can look it up, one of the meanings is wife, right? Shiva has no anga, na anga, angana, shankara asti, kattam tat sutta sambhavaha. how shall he get a wife? How should we get a son? And this is Ashmakam Bhagya Hina. Bhagya, remember that the gods have lost their Saubhagya, their auspiciousness, right? Bhagya here is also the same auspiciousness idea. How can we prosper? We have no fortune. Bhagya Hinam, right? Without fortune. So, of course, the thing, we've lost our fortune. We've become so unfortunate. But in the previous verse, Saubhagya is a name for Devi. Devi's presence is Saubhagya. So the story is a metaphor for not having Devi, right? It's a story of them losing a demon has come up, they've been kicked out of heaven, they lose their place, or full of worry, there's no seemingly way out. But it's a story about not seeing the one who's the only reality, the Parashakti Bhagavati herself, the only reality, their reality, the mother of the world, in whom everything exists, is absent or seems absent, right? So therefore they're deprived of good fortune. Let's see here. I think we'll stop with this. It is now 8:06, so actually we did not bad. We usually go a half hour over. So I'm trying to be good and not be a demon. Let's see here. Shiva has a few things we can say about Shiva has no wife, right? Of course, Shiva has Shakti, because Shakti is the only reality, right? And back to the Sati, original Sati story, as we said, that Sati represents or has been understood as the good wife, the ever devoted consort of Shiva. And that's a big theme in goddess worship in India in general. Many goddesses are connected with a god. They're the consort of the god, often representing some energy or power, Shakti, some quality of the god, and the god being Shaktiman. In the Mahabhagavat Upapurana, which we mentioned a little bit, this more hyper Shaktaized version, right? Who is Sati? She's Parashakti. She's Shakti. Who is Shakti? The way we usually think of it is Shiva is consciousness, and consciousness, the energy of consciousness is Shakti. So that's consciousness in rest is Shiva or Purusha, and consciousness in motion is Shakti or Kali. Sri Ramakrishna described that. When I think, there's actually Shiva and Shakti, Brahman and Kali are the same. There's no difference. But when I think of it, when I think of that divine of the divine reality simply as pure existence, I call it Shiva. I call it Brahman. When I think of that same reality as acting, as creating, sustaining, destroying, I call it Shakti. I call her Shakti. I call her Kali. This is a very important, sophisticated development of Shaktism and of tantric philosophy. And definitely presented in the mouth of Sri Ramakrishna many times, that the Brahman and its manifestation are one and the same. There's Shaktism went, I can't say further, but it has more extreme presentations. So in the Mahabhagavata Upapurana, it says that Sati is not just the wife of Shiva, she's the mother of Shiva. And I think that's also why she's the mother of the gods. Of course, we think like that, the mother of all the gods. And therefore she agreed to marry Shiva for the sake of the world. And Shiva, as a great lover of Devi, has accepted this relationship. But Shiva himself, and you'll see many statues or some paintings, some of them are assigned for this next week's class, where the gods are praying to Devi, or sometimes the gods become little children in front of Devi, they become the throne of Devi. Many ways to show this, right? That she's their consort, but not really. She's their mother. She's their reality. There's a verse that I just came across, right? And because we usually think of like Shiva representing the Purusha, representing the original consciousness, and Kali representing Shakti is its expression. But this beautiful verse says the opposite. It says, from that Shakti was born Mahakal Shiva. which means was born consciousness. Consciousness comes from Shakti. Of course, Sri Ramakrishna says Shakti, consciousness and Shakti are one and the same, two sides of one side, right? In many forms of Hinduism, Shakti, Purusha is predominant. Shakti is its manifestation or its power, controlled, and the source of it is Purusha or Brahman. In this, in more later tantric and Shakta Puranas, Shakti is predominant. Sri Ramakrishna held to be both same reality. But I think it's interesting because, how to say, Shakti, Shiva has no wife. But he does have Shakti, right? He's meditating on her essential nature. He himself comes from her. He's born from her, as we're all born from her. But he doesn't have this relationship, right? She has to agree to be born this way, right? And in the traditional story, maybe you've heard, she's born as Parvati. That's the end of this whole thing. She agrees to be born as Parvati. And then she does tapasya to please Shiva so that she convinced Shiva to accept her as his wife. That's a very common story. That's a version that we all hear. We always tell that story. She does so much austerity, and Shiva tests her to see her sincerity, and then accepts her as his wife. In these later Puranas, these later Shakta Puranas, that's not how it happens at all, right? Shiva asks her, please, you're my mother, you're the supreme goddess of the entire universe. Please, if you find me worthy, accept me as your husband, accept this relation, become my wife, so we can have this child and do good to the world, right? So it's interesting that the wife is not always a subordinate. In this particular story, in version of this story, Devi is supreme. Devi is supreme in these stories, and even in this version of Sati's story, and Parvati being born to marry Shiva. Parvati's being born, right, by her will, by satisfying the boon that she's promised the gods, right? And she accepts Shiva as her husband. She doesn't win Shiva as her husband, as some of the stories are told. The stories can be told from so many sides, of course, right? And we have a couple jobs to do. We're giving background stories from all many recent texts. We're giving the story as it is presented in this text, right? And we're also hinting at further developments of Shaktism, right? In other texts that are intimately related as the next generation of these stories. So, Om Tat Sat. We'll leave it there. Any questions? Jai Sri Guru Maharaj Ji ki Jai, Jai Mahamai ki Jai, Jai Swamiji Maharaj Ji ki Jai, Jai Bhuvaneshwari Devi ki Jai, Jai Ma Dakshineshwari Bhavatarini, Dakshina Kali ki Jai, Jai Ma. Oh, let me get out of this form here. Are there any questions or comments? You can unmute yourself, or Swami, if there's anything written, you can tell me.
Swamiji, I have a question.
Who are we talking to?
This is Shelby.
Oh, I Shelby. Dharma. Tell me.
When it says that Taraka is making the great sacrifices, putting his own appendages into the fire, is that just to show how far he's willing to go for the personal sacrifices, or is there a more esoteric significance to that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think the general, the primary meaning is how extreme, right? Also, he's giving what he holds most dear. And as a demon with extreme body consciousness, he's giving up pieces of it. He's chopping up his own body, right? Somebody who's very rich, attached to money, for them to sacrifice their wealth in charity, or like that, is a huge endeavor. Other people giving their time, what people hold most dear is what you give, right? And so he, being a demon, and this is a common theme, that demons do, they give what they know and what they hold valuable. And then they think, oh, God will be really impressed by me. Look what I'm giving, as if pieces of rotting flesh cut off the fingers, cutting off your own limbs is supposed to impress them, right? So it's like so I think that's one of the meanings. Also, I mean, this can be interpreted. We have to be careful not to then, use this to critique and criticize different types of austerities. But like in the Bhagavad Gita, it describes that those who perform extreme forms of asceticism, where they torture their own body, like putting their hands in the air and things like, those type of extreme things, Krishna describes them as demons. That type that type of austerity is demoniac, right? And partly you can see the demons do that, right? But it also means that because they torture me who exists within the body. That's what Krishna says, right? Since I am in the body, by torturing the body, they torture me, right? That said, I know ascetics that put their hand in the air and stand on one leg, right? And do these type of austerities. And they just, sometimes that is just sectarian differences of different types of practices, right? And other Vaishnava texts will describe saints doing those very things, right? Sometimes it's just a matter of, but we take that very seriously. I discourage people from doing extreme forms of self-mortification, right? Even you, like Sri Ramakrishna, like one time he met these women and that they were fasting, right? And Sri Ramakrishna couldn't bear the idea that they'd be fasting, right? Sri Ramakrishna did not like women to fast. Why? Because a woman, the Divine Mother is in everybody, but the Divine Mother is obviously in the woman's body, and the Divine Mother should not be made to suffer, and she should not fast, right? And so he didn't like people. He didn't like people. Generally, we wouldn't overly encourage fasting. We didn't like women to fast, right? And to form these type of extreme austerities. But I met there's a famous. He's passed away now. Maybe in the last 3-4 years he passed away, and I consider one of great blessings to have met him at the Mahakumbha, the last Mahakumbha. Some Rampriyadas and myself met him. Ambikananda, were you with us when we met Rampuri? You were not there. So we went to meet Baba Rampuri at the Junakada. He's a famous sadhu, and have some discussion with him. And he's associated with a group of Babas. There's one, I forget his name, but he put his hand up in the air 70 years ago and didn't put it down. It's a pretty austere, pretty soon, and it's something, it's not the austerity we want, right? I don't want to do that, right? But if somebody told you, oh, you can attain God by this, would you do it? We're not willing, we're barely willing to wake up at sunrise and chant a mantra for 15 minutes to realize God. Somebody told me I could realize God doing that too. And even I won't do that. So the fact that somebody's willing to do extreme things, right? And so somebody asked him, this Baba, why are you doing this? What's the benefit of this? And his simple answer is, this is the traditional way. This is the old way, right? There's yogis who have done this since ancient times, right? And so we went to he was at a Duni, and we got a chance. I mean, I've only seen pictures of him and videos of him on YouTube, interested in Babas and yogis and Naga Babas. And so he took some, with his other hand, with his left hand, he took some ash and put it on my forehead and put it on Rampriyadas's, Trevor Hall's forehead. Both of us just burst out crying. I don't know what it was. It was so powerful. I mean, the sheer power, right? And that's not that's not my type of saint, right? We know so many Babas. We've had blessings, but there's not. He wasn't a demon. I don't think he was a demon. It's an ancient Shaivite lineage of this type of austerities, right? In the Akadas, right? He was a saint a sage of a certain form. I don't know what to say, right? But anyways, this is my point is not to overly demonize people. You think, but there's a general meaning. What they hold, back to your original question, what they hold most dear that they're offering. There's a important story, very famous story. I won't tell the full story because it itself is this whole class, right? Where Indra and Vritasura, I believe, both go to a saint. I may get this wrong. Just a demon and a god. Indra and a demon, I think it's Vritasura, goes to a guru to learn about the nature of the self. This is from one of the Upanishads, right? And the guru says the body is the self. And they're both very happy. They've got Brahma Gyan. They both go back. And the demon goes back to the demons and says, good news, I've learned. I went to a great saint. He very affectionate to me. I served him for a little while and he gave me a blessing. He told me the body is the self, right? And so they enjoy the body as the self, right? That's called demons. right? Indra thought, oh, he says, he told us, but that doesn't make sense. The body's temporary. Even since right now it's changing, right? And it's temporary, it's limited. I can't be the self. And he goes back to the saint, to the guru, and he asks, is there any more knowledge of Brahman? He said, oh, you just do 100 years of tapasya. Be celibate for 100 years, tend my cows, then come. And after 100 years, he asks, and he says, the mind is the self, or prana is the self. So he goes back, he goes, that doesn't seem right. Prana is changing, it's temporary, I can experience it. Goes back to the guru, 100-year celibacy, take care of my cows, then ask again. Comes back again, question, the mind is the self. He goes like, you can imagine the story, gives us how the stories go on. It's a long section of the Upanishads, right? Finally, he realizes the self, that which is unchanging, right? But if somebody tells you the body is the self, awesome, right? So and he was like, there's whole schools of practice. I shouldn't be too flippant about it, and I'm demonizing. I could demonize the whole Western yoga tradition as body focus. I gotta be careful not to do that. We sometimes joke this way, but it's a joke, not really. We all appreciate, all of us, many of us came through this. Maybe a lot of us thought the body was, the physical body was the goal of yoga, and then we thought, is there something more? Like that, and maybe we asked another question. Maybe that's what brought us here also. So everything has its path also, right? But I sometimes think that the equivalent in our world is this obsession was making the health of the body and being the goal as being somehow another, the goal of spiritual life. It's important. We should all be healthy, right? As a vehicle for spiritual practice, not as the goal of spiritual life. Yeah. That said, don't neglect your body. I'll tell you another story for the sake of telling stories. I may have told the story to some of you already. I'm not that. In my youth, I practiced a lot of hatha yoga, and not that much, but my guru line is they're very expert yogis, right? And very, very expert yogis. They all live to be over 100, and like what you imagine in your dreams of what a yogi looks like, they look like those people, And my interest has been japa and puja and study and meditation and lectures. Like, this is my nature, right? And so one time, Swami Omananda, my sannyas guru, he was in a mood, and one of the boys of the ashram came, Guruji calling. But the way he told me is like, careful, right? He's in one of his moods. He's usually really gentle with me, right? But he was not in a gentle mood. I says, problem? And the boy goes, quickly go. And he was in the kitchen, finished, he was eating his dinner. And he immediately started chastising me. You're not doing yoga. You're not exercising, right? He says, very funny. He says, you're doing your japa and getting fat. You're sitting there, right? He just started chastising me. But this, again, even the chastisement of a yogi, of a guru, is for your blessing. And he says, so you're not the body. That's okay, right? But you have to drive from here to Benares, right? And now your car's broken. How are you going to get to Benares? He started screaming at me. Your car's broken, right? Useless. You won't get there, right? The point is not to diminish the importance of the body as a vehicle for spiritual practice, right? But the goal is not a nice car. Have a nice car to get where you're going. Not like, wow, look, I hope my car lasts forever and everybody should envy me. And, anyways, Vyom Tat Sat. Any other questions or comments? Ask me something.
I had one. Swamiji, you mentioned that ma corrects for children.
Is this Alex?
This is Alex.
Okay, your name didn't come. Okay, tell me.
You mentioned that ma corrects for children, and I wanted to ask, in light of what the Devi Stuti says, that ma is the error and all the other characteristics and beings. So if this is her divine play, what's our part in it? Yeah, that's the view, that this is her divine play, and she's playing, in one sense, she's playing all. This is one realization that some people have had, and some texts will speak this way, that she's playing all the parts. She's the only one here, and she's playing all the parts, and she's enjoying, and she's suffering,
And so what is Swami Ambikananda, you tell the story a little better of Swami Turiyananda singing that song, or about
Oh,
what is that?
oh.
I don't want to get it wrong.
So so Thakur is singing a song to the Divine Mother, one of the Shama Sangeet songs, and there's one line where it might even be the in the marketplace, Ma is flying kites, and at the end of the song, oh, and then in all this play, Mother laughs and claps her hands with all this play, and then young, not yet Swami Turiyananda, young Hari, he's Hari then, and he says, he quotes another song from Ramprasad Sen in a different mood, where he says, oh, but this play of hers is our death. It's like all this well, quite a play. It's all the suffering. Think of all the suffering in the world and all the death. That's her play. And then, without missing a beat, Sri Ramakrishna looks right at him and says, but please tell me who you are. And then he was silent. And the implication being that she's you.
Yeah. So this is a difficult thing sometimes to accept, right? That and in a certain sense, we have to accept it, but not accept it. We have to live as if we have to do good, try to end suffering, try not to suffer, try to end suffering. That's a mentally healthy attitude, right? We shouldn't glorify suffering and wallow it like this, like that, right? But she has, when the image of Kali, we'll talk about this in our Hindu goddess course in a few weeks, how we're talking about Ma symbolism. Ma stands on Shiva and she expresses in the way the one becomes many. And so she expresses, we see her four arms, right? In the Dakshina Kali form, it's behind me, she holds a sword and a severed head, on the other hand, blessings and boons, right? And the one becomes the full play of and the world of duality, or the world of multiplicity. And so it's birth and death, it's suffering and happines, it's success and failure, it's war and peace, it's health and disease, right? And it's not just those two things. It's showing the extremes. Seemingly, the world of duality is not the world of duality. The world of duality is what we call the world of multiplicity, because it's not exactly like when we think of dualism philosophically, is that between the self and God is absolute different categories. That's not what we mean by dualism. In Hinduism, by dualism, we mean the world of variegatedness. Between black and white, there's 1,000 shades. Between night and day, there's 24 hours, and each hour 24 minutes, 60 minutes, and each minute, there's infinite amount of things between it, the full variety. And it's not that we should relish in an unhealthy way the suffering, the death, and the sickness, right? But that's not mentally healthy, right? But in spite of that, we're going to get old, the body is going to get sick, and we're going to die, right? We won't always be successful. That's a fact, right? And so we also have to be able to, I'm not going to tell you what you have to do, right? This image, and the saints, many saints tell us, we have to be able to see that is also God's will. The will is also, birth is God's will, and death is God's will. Not that we're using that to justify horrendous behavior, right? But horrendous behavior happens. So obviously it's happening. And who's doing it to whom? So we have to be careful not to make category errors and that get us in big trouble, right? Because I remember one time I made this comment to one monk I know, I made a comment along the lines, "Oh, this is God's play." It was God's play. It was the opposite mood, right? Yeah, the Holocaust, that was pretty funny, huh? He started like just naming all these like pow, come God's play. He did not like the God's play part. So that's true. It's not a very nice play, right? But the question Thakur said, who are you exactly? Who's playing these parts, right? And who's the one, and also who's being upset about these atrocities? That's also her, right? So it's a pretty extreme and bold and dangerous way of looking at reality. Sri Ramakrishna tells a story of Ram and Lakshman going to take a bath in a river, and they take their bows and they stick in the mud, and then they go take their bath, and then they come out of the bath, and he takes his bow, and Lord Ram pulls his bow, and he sees blood at the bottom of his bow, and he goes, "What is this?" Right? And he digs, and he realized he had stabbed a frog that was in a hole in the sand without knowing, and the frog was not just dying; it was dying but not yet dead. And he chastised the frog. "Why didn't you croak? I could have saved you, right? Why did you see, when you're in the mouth of a snake, you make all this noise? How come you didn't croak?" Right? And the frog says, "When I'm in the mouth of a snake, I'm calling out to you to help me, to save me. But when you're the one killing me, who am I going to call to?" It's a pretty extreme view, right? So sometimes we may realize, when we're in suffering, we call out to God. At a certain point, we may realize if this is God, then who do we call out to? Then the proper thing is to be silent. And years ago, when in our devotee community, we had a very bad car accident in India, and some devotees got extremely seriously injured, life-changing car accident. Luckily, people survived, but not without life changes. And when this was happening, and we were trying to organize things from here about what happened in the villages in India, like that. And a term that kept coming to us that helped us, maybe it was a coping mechanism also from our side, but we were thinking a lot about is that what we can't control, we worship. All right. And so we do our best to do what we can. Beyond that, we have to see that as the awesome and horrible, sometimes not horrible, the horrendous, horrible as in awful, beyond control and frightening for sure, and disheartening actions of Divine Mother. We do our best and see it, but that's not. We have to be careful. That's not an excuse to diminish crimes and suffering. We want it to end, but a big picture. Who knows what's happening? Ma's doing it, and her wonderfulness and her horribleness. That's why you see the goddesses are they're not just Mahamami, right? She's Mahadevi. In the Chandi it says she's Mahadevi and Mahasuri. She's the great goddess and the great demoness. She is the full picture. And to see life boldly is actually very frightening. And you can see in the Chandi, in the Bhagavad Gita, when Krishna reveals his nature as death and life, Arjuna freaks out. "I can't hold this. Come, let me see you as my friend again, as my friend." Similarly, in the Devi Gita, the same scene is going to happen. Ma will reveal herself in the universal form, right? And the same thing, the gods, "I can't handle this. Let me see you in this two-armed form." She does reveal herself as everything: the good, the bad, the beautiful, the ugly, right? Like this. Yet we pray, Ma, give us your blessings. It's for your small children. We have nobody but you. Ma, please help those who are suffering. Let it help us to help people who are suffering, not just, and all of that stuff. But I don't know if I answered the question. Good.
Yeah. Thank you for that answer.
Yeah. Swamiji,
I don't know if you have time for one more question or.
Yeah.
Or,
I don't know if everybody else has time. I'm just getting going, but I mentioned we have to eat.
So it said in this lecture mentioned that Shakti Devi is not really the consort of the Devatas, but more their mother and ultimate reality. From a scholastic standpoint, trying to understand how that concept relates to Krishna Lila in the Srimad Bhagavatam. In that Purana, it's easy to see Yashoda Ma as Krishna's mother, but I have difficulty seeing Radha as Mother Shakti. How do Shakti practitioners and scholars view Sri Radha and explain her energy?
Yeah. So Radha is a mysterious character, right? And of course, when we usually thinking of Krishna Lila, we usually think of the stories as told in Srimad Bhagavatam. But Radha is not mentioned, not even once in Srimad Bhagavatam. Maybe in a hidden form, right? Her story is not told there. And there's some people who claim that her story is hidden. Her name is hidden, and there's a special gopi told in the Rasa Lila. So maybe Radha is that special gopi. Right, but it's not clear. So most likely, scholastically, what we understand, what the scholars are saying, is that the cult of Radha had not yet fully developed. right, when the Bhagavatam was written. There's another text. A lot of the stories of Radha come from a text called the do I have it with me? I have it on my desk, on my other desk. The what is it? The
Brahma-Vaivarta-Purana.
Thank you. What is it again?
Brahma-Vaivarta-Purana.
Brahma. Thank you. Just Brahma-Vaivarta-Purana, right? And actually, there's a great book by Mackenzie Brown. I know. I was going to suggest this to you. He wrote a book called on Goddess theology, on the development of Goddess theology, specifically on the Brahma-Vaivarta-Purana, on the development of the Radha idea. I think he'd be really, really good. It's one of his early books. He eventually focused his attention on a different aspect of the Puranas, but you probably discovered it. It's a really good book. Only older copies of it's a little hard to find, but I think I found my copy on Amazon. I'm not sure, but it took me a little while to find a copy. But so it's a different. It's because she's never in the. I can't say that. I wanted to say that she's never supreme, but in certain forms of that develop from the Radha tradition also. There's versions of the story where Radha is also Krishna's mother, right? She is she's described as the supreme Devi herself, and she there's scenes actually where she herself gives birth to Krishna, right, and gives birth to Yashoda. She gives birth. I mean, she's seen as a bhaviṣyati, but it develops in the Vaishnava tradition. This version of the Vaishnava tradition as a different Shakti, is Hladini Shakti. Right, which is it's a very subtle development of Shaktism, a particular Shakti of this internal bliss, bhakti potency of Shakti, and sometimes in some Vaishnava tradition, that's a very intimate energy of Krishna, but certain early texts will describe that as the source of everything. That Shakti, the desire to, because then you have to switch this, like why did Ma do all this? This is another corner of the Shakti development. Ma did this because of love and bliss, right? And so the Vaishnava tradition emphasizes the bliss and love aspect as the bhakti aspect. So why create the world in general? Not just why create the Krishna Lila, be part of Krishna Lila. That's a symbol of creating the world itself. Why create duality? Because love requires two, right? And so if God's nature, if the essential nature is bliss, Satchitananda, and that bliss is by nature love, right? That means it has to be experienced. It has to be, and therefore the one, Satchitananda, has to be two, because there has to be an object of the bliss, and there has to be three in order to be relationship between the lover and the object of love, or the bliss and the enjoyer of bliss, right? So that's how that's actually a very profound thing in Shaktism in general and Tantra. I think next week's discussions on Tantric, 2 weeks from now, is the Tantric goddess in our other class. How the one reality requires the world of duality, because the one needs to experience, to be one. So in Vaishnavism, they take that in a very specific way. The one has to become many in order to experience what? To experience love. Love requires two, even though there's only one. Enter Radha, right? In the Srimad Devi Bhagavatam, the text that the parent text to our Devi Gita, right? Radha also holds a very important part, right? We won't really get a chance to talk about it, but Radha has a very interesting ontological position that's developing a little independently of other Radha texts, right? Or texts on Radha, and she's seen as the Pada Shakti splits into different parts and becomes Durga, becomes Radha, becomes Maha-Saraswati, and the gods do tapasya to please them and then get their powers as Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva. So where Radha becomes the supreme goddess to whom Vishnu has to please by tapasya in order to get his position as Krishna. So it gets it comes in very interesting ways, right? But it's true that the mother aspect is not emphasized. The lover aspect is being emphasized more in the Radha. We'll talk about actually next in Sunday's discussion. We get to Radha as one of the goddesses we talk about we'll flesh that out a little bit. I'll organize some notes. I'll leave a paragraph notes on that. We can talk about it more. Brahma-Vivarta-Purana, that's an important one. Brahma-Vivarta-Purana is a fantastic text. I like Puranas. Not everybody can handle the excesses of Puranas. This is one of those that goes to wonderful excesses. I like Puranic texts. So it's a good one. Kali is also very popular in the Brahma-Vivarta-Purana. We get a lot of important hymns. One of our Kali kavachas comes from this text. So Kali is important. A lot of goddesses are important in the text. All right. Any last statements? Comments? I'm going to switch so I can see who's here. Into gallery. So Jayamo, thank you for your kind attention and your patience. And the next verses I really love, because that's good. The gods are going to go to Vishnu, and Vishnu is going to tell them the secret of life, the universe, and everything. That why are we suffering? Why are you suffering? Don't you know that the goddess exists right now, and that we can go to her as a loving mother in her jeweled heaven? Let's go to her right now. So it's a message of hope in the midst of all this. With all our suffering, all our demons, and all our body consciousness, and all the other things, whatever however we want to interpret these lines, the answer is really simple. Just we can go. We have a loving mother, immediately accessible. Let us go to her. So this is our joyful and serious endeavor, that we have a loving mother. We shall hopefully be able to meet her next week, hopefully. It may take a few weeks before she makes her big appearance. But all right, Jai Ma, Jai Ma, Jai Ma. Good night, Durgadasi.
Jai Ma.
Giri, Jai Ma, Elijah.
Jai Ma, Jai Ma.
Priya,
Jai Radhe.
Carolyn, Jai Ma, Jai Ma. Okay. Oh, Krishna Chaitra's here, Jai Ma. Jai Ma, Jai Ma. More people are showing up. All right. And Kitty's here. Maha Kitty. Jai Ma. All right. Sitaram, Sitaram, Sitaram. Om Kali, Om Kali, Om Kali.